Hello and welcome to Unlocked, an interview series proudly brought to you by Harness Projects, a new learning experience designed for the future of work. I'm Michael O'Brien, and along with my co-founder, Chris Ventura, we're excited to bring you this series of conversations with industry leaders, entrepreneurs, futurists, and creative minds, exploring and unlocking the potential for individuals and businesses to flourish in a disrupted world. In today's episode, we are talking to entrepreneur, community developer, changemaker, and co-founder of MoneyGirl, Mariam Mohammad. MoneyGirl is a social enterprise focused on making financial education more accessible for young women, giving them the freedom and confidence to make their own choices. Born in Pakistan and moving to Australia just 6 years ago, Mariam has already been recognised in the Australian Financial Review's 100 Women of Influence for the amazing work she and MoneyGirl are doing to drive gender equality. Hi, Mariam.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I mean, circumstances given, I'm doing the best I can.
Yes, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. And I'm really looking forward to getting into talking about some of the amazing work that you've been doing.
I'm very excited.
Yeah. Before we do that, though, I thought it'd be kind of cool to ask you a question that we ask all of our students at the start of their workshops. It sort of helps them lean into kind of what's the craziness that's going on in the world today. And so the question was a double question, really. Tell us, Mariam, what with everything going on, what scares you about today and what excites you about today?
Fantastic question, Mike. So hands down, the scariest thing about COVID is that it has lasted so much longer than I initially anticipated, and I know that sounds naive, but I was going to go see my family this year, and they are spread out all over the world, and now I don't know if and when that is going to happen. So as a migrant woman who doesn't have family in Australia, that's kind of the saddest part for me, is I'm not going to see my family for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. And are they in an area where that's sort of suffering badly from COVID as well, or?
That's right. So my parents are in Pakistan, and Pakistan is now peaking. So they're under lockdown, etc. right now. My siblings are in England, who have just come out of lockdown this week.
Put them at the pubs.
I know. So we don't know how long that's going to last.
Yeah. And okay, so yeah, that's there's a lot to kind of be fearful of there, and I'm sure it's on your mind a lot. I mean, conversely, what's going on in the world today that's sort of exciting you as well?
Yeah, look, I think necessity is the mother of innovation, right? And the pandemic has forced us into corners in all parts of the world, and everyone is coming up with innovative solutions to solve problems that always existed. Like in the education space, for example, all of a sudden education is accessible to anyone in anywhere in the world with any level of abilities, right? And before the pandemic, people with disabilities had been advocating for decades and education was not accessible to them, and look at education now. So that really excites me, is like all the solutions human beings are coming up with because this pandemic has forced it on us.
Yeah. And I mean, it's I think you've touched on a couple of areas there that really kind of speak to your own background. I know from your own work, you've got a real passion for diversity and inclusion and accessibility. Tell us about your background with that and what that means to you in the current landscape. You could sort of flesh that out a little bit.
Absolutely. So I came to Sydney from Pakistan like 7 years ago now. And my experience with finding employment in Australia was that it didn't really matter whether I could or couldn't do the job. The fact that I wasn't from here, I didn't have a local high school and stuff, that really impacted my chances of finding employment in Australia. Definitely meaningful employment. And I experienced some, racism, of course, and around my name as well. My last name is Mohammed, and people didn't really like it at first. And that's why you will see that one of my mandates is normalizing my last name in this country. And so that was my personal experience. It took me a long time to find employment. And it's not because I wasn't able to do stuff. I mean, I was happy to mop people's floors, but I couldn't even get a job doing that, you know? So when I was a couple of years later in a position to advocate for those like me, migrants, refugees, international students, that's what I wanted to do, because I knew I had seen that very capable people do come into this country and then either are left unemployed or are underemployed. And that's such a shame. That's such a shame, because like we can really be benefiting so much from the talent that comes into this country. I mean, I wouldn't have founded MoneyGirl if someone at some point hadn't taken a chance on me, you know? So that's kind of why I feel strongly about diversity and inclusion in the Australian workforce. And so before MoneyGirl, I was working in that space in regional employment for migrants and refugees as well. So the thing is, from a business perspective, we really leave a lot of talent, a lot of money on the table by not having all kinds of people on board. There are ideas left unsaid. There are there are opportunities gone. And sometimes we end up making really horrendous mistakes because there wasn't someone who was different to us around us, kind of warning us about the direction we're going in, you know? And we've all seen those companies, right, that make a horrible mistake through an advertising campaign or something. And everyone's like, how did this ever even get approved, right? And you know how those got approved, right? Because there was no person of color, no person with living with a disability, no person of any kind of diversity on those boards who are approving, making these decisions. So that's why from a business success perspective as well, it is incredibly important to have all kinds of people who have a say in the business decision-making process.
And, you know, we like to think of ourselves as being a really entrepreneurial company, and in some areas we really are. But you know, I think one of the greatest untapped sort of opportunities with migrants is an entrepreneurial mindset that's coming here that isn't being accessed. Do you agree?
To a certain extent, yes. From my experience working in the migrant and refugee space, especially the refugee space, a lot of people do come in who have been entrepreneurs in their past lives, and come in to set up enterprises, and may or may not necessarily have the resources available to do it. So to a certain extent, yes. And I mean, there was a study that showed refugee women are the most entrepreneurial of all Australian women, but don't quote me on that, because it was one study, right? Yeah. And I don't know how much it was backed up by evidence.
But so I think about your kind of background, you know, that sort of community engagement, advocating for, you know, capacity building around diversity and inclusion. I mean, more recently that has led to the creation of MoneyGirl. Tell us about how that happened. How did you get into supporting young women around financial literacy and co-founding MoneyGirl, which is, as we know, getting a lot of attention, which is fantastic?
Oh, thank you, Mike. So in my community engagement roles, I was working primarily with refugee women and women who've experienced violence. I'm a migrant woman to Australia. I came to Australia escaping gender violence. So from my own experience and that of the people that I was working with, I could see that one of the primary barriers for women leaving situations of violence was financial independence. And this is what I was observing in the community space, right? And so I was personally starting this journey of financial education for myself because truly there was a very thin line between me going back to a life of violence. And money was one of the most important ways to keep me safe. And while I was on this journey, I realized that at that time in Australia, we didn't really have resources that were specific to young people, especially not young women, teaching us about what money is, how the system works, how to make the system work for us rather than be slaves to the system all our lives. And it wasn't preparing us for a financially secure future, right? So what I was doing and what my co-founder was doing as well, because we both met at university, we were getting out of university at the same time. We were both on this journey together. We were both accessing American financial education and then kind of translating it to the Australian financial system for ourselves. And that was a fair bit of work. So one, we thought, if we're doing that hard work, why not put it into a format that other young people in Australia can benefit from as well? That was one. Number two was I understood that for a lot of women experiencing violence, this is a key barrier, right? And I know that we have services that come into times of crisis to help you out. But really what we wanted to do with MoneyGirl was to be proactive and preventative in teaching young people these skills. A lot of those young people are women, so that we remove or at least reduce the barrier of financial independence later in their lives. Because women will continue to experience, unfortunately, all of these other issues, which I or MoneyGirl am not solving, like domestic violence, like sexual violence. But we can reduce this one barrier that makes it slightly easier for them to leave situations of violence.
Fantastic. And, full disclosure, I'm really excited that Harness Projects is doing a project with you and with MoneyGirl to kind of look at, how this training or how this education can be accessed more broadly, because my understanding is that, while digital was on your roadmap, all of the training was being delivered in person. And now that COVID or this pandemic has happened, you've had to kind of pivot as a business or really think about how you can deliver what you were doing in a digital environment. But also, I guess there's a lot of opportunity that sort of is coming with that around accessibility.
That's right. So we are definitely one of those educators who were shoved into a corner. And I mean, education should always be accessible. And we understood that our education was not accessible to a lot of people because it was delivered in person. However, it was more our own, I suppose, limitation that we weren't so digitally literate to translate our education resources or education delivery online. But you know what? When push comes to shove, we figured something out, right? And I'm very glad that we did. And I'm glad that educators did get pushed into this corner, because education should be accessible to everybody. So yes, we did pivot. And now, like you said, what we will be looking at is how it can be made more easily accessible to a broader range of people, because we are in the digital space now.
Yes, and it's, whatever happens in the future, whoever I speak to, everybody sort of says the same thing. While some things will return to the way they were, some things are changed forever. And like you said before, I think this thing about education online, it can happen, and it can happen really in a really engaging way, and it doesn't have to be the old boring way that everybody thought about it.
And it can happen very quickly if you just put your mind to it, because that's the reason why a lot of educators like ourselves didn't move online earlier, right? Because they were like, we have to figure this out, we have to figure that out. And then necessity, the mother of invention. Yes,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
figure out a way.
You figure out a way. This sort of makes me think about, the whole issue of financial literacy with what's going on at the moment. When you see economies that are just, tanking all around the world, and more than ever, people are kind of looking at the way that they use their money, the way that they save their money. Everybody's, focusing a lot more in on that. So it feels really timely that, what you're doing, even though perhaps it started with trying to support young women around financial literacy, actually has a lot more broad appeal potentially.
That's right. And one of the things for us during this period has been that we don't need to explain to people why this is important for you. Before COVID, that was a big part of what we needed to do, is educate people why you should care about your financial literacy. Whereas right now, everyone has just experienced how fragile our financial well-being is for most of us. Even those of us who think we're well off are just a couple of paychecks away from being homeless. And so that's really struck home with people during this pandemic. And it's like, I don't need to tell people why it's important right now. They understand why this is a very important life skill for them to learn forever, not just right now during the pandemic, but they need to build that financial resilience in order to live a financially secure life, because this is not the last time, especially if you're a young person, it's not the last time you're going to see such a huge economic downturn. You will see it again and again and again in your life. And it is up to you to build that financial resilience.
Yeah, such great advice. I'm so curious, to sort of for you to give us a bit of sort of a peek inside, the MoneyGirl training that you do. Like, what are some of the key insights that you sort of, maybe you've touched on them, but I'm so keen to understand, like, from your own experience as well. What are the kind of the top three, if you like, insights that you kind of tell people, when they're trying to learn about the importance of financial literacy?
Yeah. Okay. So the first and biggest aha moment that happens with people is that before we go into any of the technical financial literacy stuff, we go into people's money mindset and money story and money beliefs. And that for people is like, I don't know why we're doing this. Where are we going with this? What is about to happen? And then we talk about, the things that they grew up seeing about money. We identify some of the things that they have internalized about money, even subconsciously without realizing it. And we talk about how that may or may not still be a hurdle for them in today's financial life, right? And then they go like, oh, boom. Like, I've just realized I've turned into my father or something, they're like, oh my God, I never realized why I did so and so, but now it makes sense. So that's one of the first things that people learn, is that they, before the technical skills, come your understanding of your own story and beliefs, because behind long-term behavioral change is a mindset shift.
Yeah.
So I can teach you the technical stuff, but if you're coming at it from the same beliefs, your habits are not going to change. So that's the first thing, first aha moment that happens. Shall I keep going?
Yeah, please.
The second aha moment that happens is we do an exercise in tracking people's finances. So we actually sit down as a group and we go through our bank statement for the last couple of weeks, and we look at exactly where our money is going down to the last dollar. And hands down, like, there are so many ahas in there. They're like, people are like, I didn't realize I spent so much on Uber Eats. Oh my God, I spent X much on buying coffee. I just thought I was spending a couple of bucks. So those are some of the biggest aha moments. So this is kind of the journey that we go on, is we start with people's like actually mindset, beliefs, stories. So where you have come from, right? And then we become present to who we are now, where we're at right now. We learn some of the skills that impact us today, like budgeting, saving, expense tracking. We learn about income tax, superannuation, and then we go into looking at the future. So we talk about investing and how to talk about money in relationships. So setting you up for future success. And over there, a lot of the aha moments come from, I didn't realize it would be this simple, like the basics would be this simple. It just always seemed so inaccessible to me. I never understood when people were talking about this, or it sounded too boring. But then they finish the program and they're like, that was actually pretty interesting and I understood it. So now it makes sense. you know?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? How, you know, and that's again the beauty of education, is that sort of awareness can lead to, like you say, a mindset shift, and something that you felt was completely almost out of your control all of a sudden becomes in your control. You feel empowered by that. You feel in control of it, and all of a sudden you start to use that information and knowledge to sort of make changes.
That's right. Yeah. So the Money Girl program is very much like laying that foundation for
Yeah.
people so that they can, like, of course, financial education, like any kind of education, is an ongoing journey, right? We just want them to have this foundation so that they feel like they can keep going further on this journey. They can level up further.
And one of the conversations that, you know, we have with Harness Projects is, you know, what we're trying to help people understand is, you know, what are the kind of skills that you really need to nurture for the future of work, you know, kind of bring some visibility and awareness around the changes that are happening in the employment landscape, but also the value of investing in yourself. You know, taking the time, it might be money, it might be time, but putting that attention into your own learning actually is going to make the kind of difference that you're looking for. You know, you're either stuck in something that you don't love, or you don't know why you're not getting the job, or whatever it is. There's always reasons for that, and education is the best way to kind of bring awareness to that, to make change.
It is. And what have you found, Mike, are people's like responses to it? Like, are they receptive to that kind of, because that does come from like a bit of a different mindset too, like a survivor mode mindset, you know, where you just gotta hustle to get stuff done.
Yeah, and look, I absolutely understand anybody who says to me, look, financially I can't afford to do, you know, your course right now. That, I mean, obviously, right, that makes sense on a lot of levels. But then sometimes you look at it from the other angle and you say, well, unless you're, you know, upskilling, unless you're investing in yourself, it's going to be, it's potentially going to be harder down the track. So it's always trying to, you know, just bring it, like I said before, just bring visibility. And so some people are really open to it, and particularly if they're in a situation where they can afford to put a little bit of money towards, you know, getting a new skill set that's going to help them keep their job or make a job transition. I think probably from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges is just, I think there's a lot of people that are taking too long to kind of recognize some of the big shifts that are happening because of technology. I think we have a bit of a mindset here that is, it's a bit of the she'll be right kind of, you know, terminology that you've heard of, you know. Whereas, you know, I'm on the other side looking at research and statistics and all that sort of stuff going like, you know, I got to do me some learning. So, you know, I don't know if that answers your question, but like, you know, it's probably something that a lot of people are thinking about. Is like, how do I prepare for the future, and how do I do it in the most effective way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you will know this more, Mike, but like the world is gonna change drastically, is it not, Mike? What is it, like 70% of the jobs that exist today will not exist in the future?
All those kinds of things. We're seeing a lot of kind of jobs. This is why it's a really important education piece, because there's many jobs that are being sort of removed or taken away by automation. They're being replaced by other jobs. So it's actually finding out what those jobs are and what are the skills that are needed for those jobs. And digital's a big part of that, and so is the human being. The human being in that environment and the attributes that a human can bring around creativity, collaboration, all of those things are more important than ever.
That's right. So, and preparing ourselves and the future generations for those jobs rather than the jobs that are going to become obsolete.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also helping people who are mid-career now, even who are getting affected by what's happening, to sort of, you know, how do you move across? How do you transition across to something that, you know, you weren't necessarily trained for? What's the best way to do that? How do you get the experience that companies are always looking for? You know, it's a bit of a battlefield, but you know, again, I think it always comes back to education. I think that's probably why you're in that space, because you can see the transformation that can happen.
That's right. Look, I did grow up in a household that placed a lot of importance on education, but just also personally, coming from where I've come from, having the experiences I've had, I always believed education would be my emancipation, and I believe that it was. I believe the path that I took is what led me here, and not stuck in that life of violence.
Yeah.
So I think education transforms lives in more than just one way. You don't just achieve the outcomes of what you're learning. You know, when people are going through the MoneyGirl financial literacy course, they're not just learning financial literacy. It is setting up a solid foundation for them to make better financial decisions, which are going to impact their life. And we're dealing with young people, so the impacts of that is going to be the next 40, 50, 60 years until they retire. So it transforms lives in immeasurable ways, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, I really do feel like I could chat to you for ages about education, and certainly, you know, we, like you, the outcomes that you see, the outcomes that we're seeing are so amazing in terms of people feeling empowered, confident. They've found something that they actually love to do, that they know that there's a future in. It's I think it's one of the main reasons why we're in it, is to see that kind of change occur.
And that feeling of empowerment is just as important as any tangible outcome, because it sets the person up on a path of success. Even if the tangible outcome is not what they wanted, if they feel in control enough, powerful enough, they will find a way for themselves.
Yeah. Listen, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been awesome.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, how can people sort of find out more about what you're doing and support you in everything that you're involved in?
Okay. So if you Google Money Mariam, that's money, Mariam, Mariam, you will find me on Instagram and LinkedIn. You can stay in touch with me there. The next MoneyGirl course will be enrolling soon, and you can find out more about it on moneygirl.co. That's moneygirl.co/course.
Fantastic. And really look forward to doing the Harness project with MoneyGirl coming up. Should be fantastic.
Yay!
Bring it on. All right, Mariam, take care.
Thank you, Mike.
Soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for watching Unlocked by Harness Projects. For more information on how our real company projects help you learn the skills required for the future of work, head over to harnessprojects.com.au and follow us on Facebook. If you want to find out more about partnering on a Harness project, email us at info@harnessprojects.com.au.